My mother stole $5,000 from my trust fund, and I didn't say a word. Not one single word. I just watched her do it, watched her type in the password she wasn't supposed to know, watched her transfer the money into her own account with fingers that didn't even tremble. And then I waited. I waited 10 years for the perfect moment to destroy everything she loved. My name is Amelia Hart, and this is the story of how I became my mother's worst nightmare. The trust fund was set up by my grandmother, Margaret Hart, on my 10th birthday. She was my father's mother, a woman with steel gray hair and hands that smelled like lavender soap and fresh garden soil. She saw something in me that nobody else did. She saw a fighter. Millie, she used to call me, pulling me onto her lap in her big Victorian house on Maple Street. You've got your father's eyes, but my heart. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you're not enough. You're more than enough. You're everything. My father, David Hart, died when I was 6 years old. Car accident on a rainy Tuesday night. I don't remember much about him anymore, just the way he smelled like coffee and sawdust, and the sound of his laugh, deep and warm like thunder rolling across a summer sky. My mother, Patricia, remarried within 18 months. That's when things started to change. Before my father died, my mother was different. Or maybe I just remember her differently because I was young and desperate to believe that she loved me. She used to braid my hair before school and kiss my forehead when she tucked me in at night. She sang off-key in the kitchen while making pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse. She was the kind of mother that other kids envied. But after my father's life insurance money came through, something shifted in her eyes. It was like watching a light slowly dim, then flicker, then go out completely. She started going out more, coming home later. Her hugs became quick and hollow. Her kisses landed on the top of my head instead of my cheek. I was 7 years old, and I already knew what it felt like to be invisible in your own home. Then came Richard. Richard Caldwell was my stepfather, a man with a fake smile and greedy eyes. He sold used cars for a living and wore cheap cologne that burned my nose. My mother met him at a bar 6 months after my father's funeral. She brought him home that same night, and by morning, he was drinking coffee from my father's favorite mug. "Amelia, this is Richard," my mother said, not meeting my eyes. "He's going to be living with us now." I remember standing in the kitchen doorway in my pajamas, clutching my stuffed rabbit, Mr. Whiskers. Richard looked at me the way you might look at a piece of furniture you don't really want but have to keep because someone gave it to you. He didn't say hello, he didn't smile. He just nodded once and went back to reading the newspaper. They got married 3 months later at the courthouse. No flowers, no cake, no family. Just a judge and a witness who worked at the car dealership with Richard. I wasn't even invited. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, watched me that afternoon while my mother became Mrs. Caldwell. When she came home, she didn't have a wedding ring on her finger. She had a new car in the driveway, a red convertible that cost $30,000. "We need to look successful," Richard explained to me that night, patting my head like I was a dog. "Success attracts success, kid. You'll understand when you're older." I didn't understand. I was 7. What I understood was that my mother had stopped cooking dinner. She had stopped helping me with homework. She had stopped asking about my day. She had stopped looking at me altogether unless Richard was watching. Then she would put on a show, hugging me too tight, kissing my forehead too fast, playing the role of a loving mother for an audience of one. And Richard was always watching. By the time I turned 10, I had learned to survive on my own. I made my own breakfast, packed my own lunch, walked myself to school. I did my homework alone in my room and fell asleep to the sound of my mother and Richard arguing downstairs. They fought about money mostly. Money and the things money could buy. My father's life insurance had bought them the house and the cars and the vacations to places I never went. They would leave me with Mrs. Patterson for a week at a time while they flew to Cancun or Vegas or Miami. I stopped missing them after the 3rd trip. You can't miss something you never really had. Then my grandmother came to visit on my 10th birthday. Margaret Hart arrived in a taxi with a birthday cake from the bakery downtown and a wrapped box tied with a gold ribbon. She was 72 years old, retired from running her own real estate company, and she didn't trust my mother further than she could throw her. The tension between them was always there, thick and sharp like the smell of vinegar. "Patricia," my grandmother said, stepping through the front door without knocking. "You look tired. Are you sleeping well?" My mother's smile was tight and fake. I'm fine, Margaret. Just busy. Busy doing what exactly? My grandmother set the cake on the kitchen counter and pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and safety. Happy birthday, my Millie, 10 years old. Can you believe it? I couldn't believe she had come. My grandmother lived 3 hours away, and my mother always had an excuse for why we couldn't visit. Too far, too expensive, too much going on. But on my birthdays, Margaret Hart always found a way. She was the only person in the world who made me feel like I mattered. After the cake and the presents, a new doll, a set of books, a silver locket with my father's picture inside my grandmother asked my mother to sit down at the kitchen table. Richard was at work, and for once, the house was quiet. I've set up a trust fund for Amelia, my grandmother announced, pulling a thick folder from her bag. $50,000 from my retirement savings. It's hers when she turns 21. My mother's eyes widened. For a moment, I saw something flash across her face, something hungry and quick, before she smoothed her expression into something resembling gratitude. Margaret, that's very generous, but we don't need. It's not for you. My grandmother's voice was cold steel wrapped in velvet. It's for Amelia. For her education, for her future, for whatever she needs to build a good life. The money is in an account with strict conditions. Only Amelia can access it when she's of age. Until then, it's managed by my lawyer, Mr. Peterson. My mother's jaw tightened. I'm her mother. I should have some say. You have a roof over your head because of David's insurance money, my grandmother interrupted, her eyes blazing. You have a car and vacations and God knows what else because my son worked himself to death trying to provide for this family. The trust fund is Amelia's, Patricia, not yours, not Richard's, Amelia's. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a person. I sat at the table, my hands folded in my lap, and watched my mother's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Anger, greed, embarrassment, and finally, resignation. Of course, my mother said, her voice sweet as poison. Whatever Amelia needs, I only want what's best for her. My grandmother didn't believe her. I could see it in the way her eyes narrowed, the way her shoulders remained stiff and guarded. She looked at me then, and her expression softened into something almost sad. Millie, she said, taking my hands in hers. This money is your freedom. Don't let anyone take it from you. Not ever. I didn't understand then what she meant. I was 10 years old. $50,000 might as well have been $1 million. It was just a number, an abstract concept that had nothing to do with my daily life of frozen dinners and lonely evenings, and pretending not to hear my mother and Richard fighting. But I remembered her words. I remembered them like a prayer, like a promise, like a weapon waiting to be used. The years that followed were a slow erosion of everything good in my life. My grandmother visited less often as her health began to fail. The calls became shorter, the letters more infrequent. By the time I was 13, she had stopped coming altogether. Her heart, Mrs. Patterson told me, wasn't what it used to be. She couldn't make the drive anymore. I visited her once that summer, taking a Greyhound bus alone because my mother said she was too busy to take me. My grandmother was thinner than I remembered, paler, smaller somehow. But her eyes were still sharp, and her hands still smelled like lavender. Promise me, Millie, she whispered, gripping my fingers with surprising strength. Promise me you'll be strong. Promise me you won't let them break you. I promise, I said, not knowing who them was. I thought she meant my mother and Richard. I thought she meant the loneliness and the neglect and the constant feeling of being unwanted. I didn't realize until much later that she meant something else entirely. Margaret Hart died 6 months later, 2 days before Christmas. A stroke in her sleep. Peaceful, the doctor said. She didn't suffer. But I suffered. I suffered in a way that hollowed me out and left me walking around like a ghost in my own life. She was the only person who had ever truly loved me, and now she was gone. My mother didn't cry at the funeral. Neither did I. We sat in the front row of the little church on Maple Street, surrounded by people who had known my grandmother for decades, and we didn't shed a single tear between us. But for different reasons. My mother didn't cry because she was already thinking about the money. I didn't cry because I had run out of tears years ago. The funeral was on a Thursday. By Monday, my mother was on the phone with Mr. Peterson, my grandmother's lawyer, asking about the trust fund. I'm her mother, I heard her say from the kitchen, her voice low and urgent. I should be able to access that money for her expenses. Clothes, school supplies, extracurricular activities. It's not like I'm asking for myself. But she was asking for herself. I knew it even then, standing in the hallway with my back against the wall. I knew it in my bones, the same way I knew that Richard had lost his job at the dealership and they were 3 months behind on the mortgage. I knew it because I had learned to listen. Listening was how I survived. Listening told me when to hide in my room and when to stay out of the house entirely. Mr. Peterson said no. The trust fund was locked until my 21st birthday, with no exceptions. He was a good man, old and stubborn, and fiercely loyal to my grandmother's memory. He wasn't going to let my mother touch a single penny. But my mother was resourceful, and Richard was desperate, and together they found a way. It happened on a Tuesday night in October. I was 15 years old, a sophomore in high school, already working a part-time job at the local grocery store to buy my own clothes and food. I came home late that night, exhausted and hungry, and found my mother sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. Richard stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his face unreadable. "Amelia," my mother said, her voice too bright, too cheerful. "Come here for a minute." I didn't want to. Every instinct I had told me to walk away, to go to my room, to lock the door and pretend I hadn't heard her. But I was tired and young and still, despite everything, desperate for her attention. So I walked to the kitchen table and sat down across from her. "We need your help," Richard said, which was the first time he had ever said those words to me. "The bank needs to verify some information for the trust fund, just a simple phone call. You tell them you're giving your mother permission to access the account for educational expenses." I looked at my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared at the laptop screen, at the bank's website, at the numbers that represented my future. "I can't do that," I said quietly. "Grandma said, your grandmother is dead." My mother's voice was sharp, cutting me off like a knife. "And I am your mother. I know what's best for you. This money is sitting there doing nothing when we could be using it to help you. New clothes, a better school, tutoring for your classes. Don't you want those things?" I wanted my grandmother. I wanted my father. I wanted a mother who loved me without conditions and a home that felt safe. But those things were gone, and all I had left was $50,000 in a bank account that I couldn't touch for 6 more years. "No," I said. "I don't want to." My mother's face hardened. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before. Hatred. Pure, cold hatred directed at her only daughter. Richard sighed and walked away from the table, disappearing into the living room. My mother leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen to me, Amelia. You will do this. You will call that bank, and you will tell them whatever they need to hear. Or I swear to God, you will regret it." "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "You already took everything else." She didn't answer. She just stared at me with those cold, dead eyes until I couldn't take it anymore. I got up from the table and walked to my room, closing the door behind me with a soft click that sounded like the end of something. I thought that was the end of it. I thought my refusal had stopped whatever plan they had cooked up. But I underestimated my mother. I underestimated her greed, her desperation, her willingness to destroy her own child for $5,000. A month later, my grandmother's locket disappeared from my jewelry box. Then my father's photograph vanished from my nightstand. Then my new clothes, bought with my own money from the grocery store, started going missing from my closet. Small things at first, things I might have misplaced or forgotten. But then bigger things. My laptop, a Christmas gift from my grandmother years ago. My savings jar, with nearly $800 I had earned bagging groceries. My winter coat, the only warm one I owned. I confronted my mother one morning before school. She was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, looking at her phone. "Where is my stuff?" I demanded. "My coat, my laptop, my money. Where did you put it?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said without looking up. "Maybe you should be more responsible with your belongings." "I am responsible. You stole from me." Now she looked up, and her smile was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. It didn't reach her eyes. It didn't touch any part of her that was human or maternal or real. "Prove it," she said. I couldn't prove it. There were no cameras in the house, no witnesses, no evidence. It was her word against mine, and she was the adult, the mother, the one everyone would believe. I was just a teenager with a history of being difficult, a girl who had never quite fit in, a child who had always been too quiet and too watchful and too strange. So I did the only thing I could do. I stopped fighting. I stopped asking questions. I stopped hoping that things would get better. I focused on school, on work, on getting out. I counted down the days until my 18th birthday, when I could legally leave that house and never come back. But I wasn't counting on what happened next. 3 weeks after my 16th birthday, I came home from school to find my mother and Richard waiting for me in the living room. They were dressed nicely, which was unusual. My mother wore a blouse I had never seen before, and Richard had actually shaved. They looked like they were about to go somewhere important, but they were both sitting on the couch, watching the front door like they had been waiting for me. "Amelia," my mother said, patting the cushion beside her. "Sit down, we need to talk." I didn't sit. I stood in the doorway, my backpack still on my shoulders, and waited. "We've been thinking," Richard said, his voice oily and smooth, "about your future, about college, about how expensive everything is these days." "I have a job," I said. "I'm saving money." "Your job pays minimum wage," my mother scoffed. "You'll never save enough for college on $8 an hour. But there's a solution, a simple solution that will help all of us." My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. I had known since the night she showed me the laptop, since the night she asked me to call the bank. This was round 2, and they had come prepared. "The trust fund," my mother continued, pulling a piece of paper from her pocket. "We found a way to access it without your permission. There's a loophole. If you're declared legally incapacitated, a parent can take control of the funds for your care." "I'm not incapacitated," I said. "I'm perfectly fine." "Not yet you're not." Richard stood up and walked toward me, and for the first time in my life, I was genuinely afraid of him. "But people have accidents all the time, Amelia. Slippery floors, bad food. Stress can do terrible things to a young person's mind." I looked at my mother, searching for anything that resembled love or mercy or basic human decency. I found nothing. Her face was a mask of cold determination, her eyes fixed on that piece of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. "You're threatening me," I whispered. "You're threatening to hurt me so you can steal my money." "We're not threatening anything," my mother said smoothly. "We're offering you a choice. You can sign over access to the trust fund voluntarily, or we can take it through the courts. Either way, we get the money, but one way is much less painful for everyone involved." I looked at the piece of paper in her hand. It was a document, several pages long, covered in legal language I couldn't begin to understand. At the bottom, a blank line waited for my signature. "What if I say no?" I asked. My mother folded the paper and put it back in her pocket. "Then we'll see you in court. And trust me, Amelia, you don't want that. Judges tend to side with parents, especially when the child in question has a history of emotional problems." I had never had emotional problems. I had never seen a therapist or taken medication or been diagnosed with anything. But my mother had been planting seeds for years, telling teachers and doctors and neighbors that I was difficult, that I was troubled, that I had never been the same since my father died. She had been building a case against me since I was 6 years old, and I hadn't even known it. That night, I packed a bag. I took my birth certificate, my social security card, and the few possessions my mother hadn't already stolen. I waited until the house was quiet, until I could hear Richard snoring from their bedroom, and then I climbed out my window and walked to Mrs. Patterson's house. The old woman opened the door in her bathrobe, her gray hair loose around her shoulders. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside without a word. "She's trying to take my money," I said, crying for the first time in years. "She's trying to take everything." Mrs. Patterson held me while I sobbed, her hands gentle on my back, her voice murmuring words I couldn't understand. When I finally ran out of tears, she made me tea and toast and sat me down at her kitchen table. "Your grandmother knew this might happen," she said quietly. "She told me before she died. She said Patricia would come for that money eventually. She made me promise to help you if she did." I stared at her. You knew she was going to steal from me?" "I knew she might try, but I didn't know how or when." Mrs. Patterson reached into her robe pocket and pulled out a small key, old and brass and worn smooth from years of use. "Your grandmother left something for you. Something she said would protect you when the time came." The key opened a lockbox in Mrs. Patterson's closet, hidden behind old blankets and photo albums. Inside the box was a letter, sealed with wax, addressed to me in my grandmother's careful handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. My dearest Millie, if you're reading this, then Patricia has tried to take the trust fund. I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you. I'm sorry I left you alone with her. But I always knew this day might come, and I prepared for it the best way I could. The trust fund isn't the only thing I left you. Years ago, before you were born, I bought a piece of land on the other side of the state. 50 acres of nothing much, just woods and a creek and an old cabin that's been in our family for generations. I put it in your name, not the trust, with instructions that it couldn't be sold or transferred without your written consent. It's not worth much in dollars, maybe 20 or 30,000. But it's yours, completely yours. Patricia can't touch it. More importantly, I left you something else. Something I've been working on for years. In the bottom of this box, you'll find a flash drive. On that flash drive is every dirty secret I could uncover about your mother and Richard. The insurance fraud, the tax evasion, the false disability claims, everything. I couldn't prove any of it while I was alive, but I gathered enough to ruin them if someone with time and determination decided to dig deeper. That someone, Millie, is you. If you choose to be, you have two choices. You can walk away, build your own life, and never look back, or you can fight. Either way, I love you. Either way, I'm proud of you. You have my heart, my courage, and my stubbornness. Use them wisely. Forever yours, Grandma. I sat on Mrs. Patterson's living room floor with that flash drive in my hand and cried until I had nothing left. Not tears of sadness, not this time. Tears of relief, tears of rage, tears of love for a woman who had seen everything coming and had prepared for it all. My grandmother hadn't abandoned me. She had armed me. For the next 2 years, I played a role. I stayed in that house, went to school, worked my job, and smiled at my mother like nothing had changed. I let her think she had won. I let her think I was broken, defeated, too scared to fight back. I let her believe that the trust fund was safe, that I had given up, that she could wait me out until I turned 21 and then find another way to take the money. But all of that was a lie. Every smile, every nod, every quiet evening spent in my room was part of a plan that I had been building since the night Mrs. Patterson gave me that key. I spent those 2 years learning. I learned about the law, about fraud, about the kind of evidence that could send people to prison. I learned about forensic accounting, about tracing money through shell companies and offshore accounts. I learned about the statute of limitations for various crimes and the best ways to present evidence to federal authorities. I also learned about patience, about waiting, about the difference between revenge and justice. Because I didn't just want my mother to lose, I wanted her to understand. I wanted her to feel what I had felt every night for 16 years. The loneliness, the betrayal, the slow, crushing realization that the person who was supposed to love you most in the world saw you as nothing more than an obstacle between her and what she wanted. On my 18th birthday, I moved out. I rented a tiny apartment above a garage, furnished with thrift store finds and hand-me-downs from Mrs. Patterson. I enrolled in the local community college, using money from my job and a small scholarship I had earned through sheer determination. I changed my phone number and blocked my mother on every platform. I disappeared from her life as completely as she had disappeared from mine. And then I waited some more. The trust fund sat untouched, growing slowly with interest. The land sat empty, the old cabin slowly falling into disrepair. And the flash drive sat in a safe deposit box at the bank, waiting for the right moment. I told myself I would never use it. I told myself that revenge was poison, that moving on was the only way to heal, that my grandmother wouldn't want me to spend my life consumed by anger and hatred. I told myself all of the things that healthy people tell themselves when they're trying to be better than the people who hurt them. But then my mother found me. It was 3 years later. I was 21 years old, a junior in college, working 2 jobs and barely sleeping. I had built a life for myself, small and fragile and mine. I had friends who didn't know my past, a boyfriend who made me laugh, a future that didn't include Patricia Caldwell. And then she showed up at my apartment on a rainy Sunday afternoon, wearing an expensive coat and a smile that made my skin crawl. "Hello, Amelia," she said, stepping through the door like she owned it. "You look good. College agrees with you. What are you doing here?" My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "How did you find me?" I'm your mother. I always know where you are. She looked around my apartment, her eyes lingering on the second-hand furniture and the stack of textbooks on the coffee table. This is cozy. I expected more, honestly. All that money from your grandmother and you're living like a student. I am a student. Yes, well. She sat down on my couch without being invited, crossing her legs like she was posing for a photograph. I came to talk about the trust fund. You're 21 now. That money is yours. $50,000 plus interest. It's been sitting there for 11 years doing nothing. Actually, it's been earning interest. That's the opposite of doing nothing. My mother's smile tightened. Don't get smart with me, Amelia. I didn't drive 3 hours to argue about economics. I came to make you an offer. I don't want your offers. You haven't heard it yet. She leaned forward, her eyes glittering with the same hunger I had seen when I was 15. Richard and I are starting a business. A real estate development company. We've found a piece of land that could be worth millions, but we need capital to get started. $50,000 would be enough to secure the financing we need. You want me to give you my trust fund? I want you to invest in your family's future. Think of it as a loan. We'll pay you back with interest. Double what you give us, maybe triple. I stared at her. This woman who had threatened to hurt me, who had stolen from me, who had looked at me with hatred in her eyes and called it love. She was sitting on my couch in my home, asking me for money like we were old friends catching up over coffee. No, I said. Her smile vanished. Excuse me? I said no. You're not getting a single penny from me. Not now, not ever. You had your chance to be my family, and you chose money instead. You chose Richard instead. You chose yourself instead. Every single day, for 16 years, you chose yourself, and now you want me to choose you. No, absolutely not. My mother stood up slowly, her face hardening into something cold and ugly. You ungrateful little brat, I gave you everything. I gave you a home, food, clothes. I sacrificed everything for you. You sacrificed me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You sacrificed me for a man who never loved you and a life you couldn't afford. You stole from me. You threatened me. You tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could take what wasn't yours. Don't stand in my apartment and pretend to be a victim. You're not a victim, you're a thief. The slap came out of nowhere. My head snapped to the side, my cheek burning with the impact. I tasted blood, copper, and salt, and for a moment I couldn't see straight. When my vision cleared, my mother was standing over me, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. Don't you ever, she hissed, talk to me like that again. I am your mother. I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it. And just like that, all of my patience evaporated. All of my carefully constructed indifference, all of my hard-won peace, all of my determination to be better than her. It vanished in the space of a heartbeat, replaced by something cold and sharp and final. Get out, I said quietly. Not until, get out of my apartment, now, or I'm calling the police. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Call them, tell them your mother slapped you, see how far that gets you. I pulled out my phone and dialed. She watched me for a moment, her eyes flickering with something that might have been fear, before she turned and walked out the door. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She just left like she had always left, like I was nothing more than a house she had outgrown. The police came. They took my statement, photographed my face, asked if I wanted to press charges. I said no. What was the point? A misdemeanor assault charge wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the years of neglect or erase the memory of her hatred. It would just drag me back into her orbit, and I had spent 3 years escaping that gravity. But that night, lying in bed with an ice pack pressed to my cheek, I made a decision. I opened my laptop and checked the trust fund balance. $50,000 plus interest, more than enough. And then I opened the safe deposit box key that I kept hidden in my sock drawer. The next morning, I drove to the bank. I retrieved the flash drive, the letters, the documents that my grandmother had spent years gathering. I spread them out on my kitchen table and started reading. The insurance fraud was the biggest. My mother and Richard had filed 3 separate claims for water damage to their house, collecting nearly $40,000 from insurance companies. But the house had never flooded. The damage was fake, the claims were fraudulent, and the contractor who signed off on the repairs was Richard's cousin from Florida. The tax evasion was smaller but more damning. Richard had been running his car dealership as a cash business, pocketing sales taxes that should have gone to the state. 8 years of unreported income, nearly $200,000 in stolen tax revenue. The false disability claims were the most personal. My mother had been collecting Social Security disability benefits since I was 12 years old, claiming that she was unable to work due to chronic back pain. But the photographs I found in my grandmother's files told a different story. My mother playing tennis at the country club, my mother hiking in the mountains, my mother water skiing on vacation. All of it documented, dated, and saved for exactly this moment. I had enough evidence to put them both in prison. But I didn't want prison. Not yet. Prison was too easy, too quick, too clean. I wanted them to suffer the way I had suffered. Slowly, painfully, irrevocably, so I made a plan. A beautiful, terrible, perfect plan. The first thing I did was withdraw the entire trust fund. $50,000, plus interest, transferred into an account that only I could access. Then I hired a private investigator, a woman named Detective Martinez who had retired from the FBI and now worked for herself. I gave her the flash drive and told her to find more. More evidence, more crimes, more ways to destroy my mother's carefully constructed life. While she worked, I worked on myself. I went to therapy for the first time in my life. I talked about my father and my grandmother, about the years of neglect and the moment my mother slapped me. I cried, I screamed, I threw things, and slowly, painfully, I started to heal. But I didn't forgive. Forgiveness was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not yet. Detective Martinez called me 6 months later. She had found something big, something that changed everything. "Your mother didn't just steal from you," she said, her voice grim over the phone. "She stole from your grandmother, while Margaret was still alive, while she was sick and dying and couldn't protect herself." "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother had a savings account. A separate one, not connected to the trust fund. About $80,000, her retirement savings. Your mother forged her signature on a power of attorney document and drained the account 2 months before your grandmother died." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I couldn't do anything but sit in my car, in the parking lot of the grocery store where I still worked part-time, and listen to Detective Martinez tell me that my mother had robbed my grandmother on her deathbed. "She used the money to buy a boat," Detective Martinez continued. "A 40-foot cabin cruiser. It's registered under Richard's name, but the down payment came from your grandmother's account. I have bank records, signature comparisons, and a witness who saw your mother forge the documents. This is federal fraud, Amelia. Wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft. We're talking serious prison time." I hung up the phone and sat in my car for a long time. The sun set. The parking lot emptied. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, casting orange pools of light on the asphalt. And then I made my decision. I didn't go to the police. I didn't call the FBI. I didn't hand over the evidence and let the justice system do its work. That would have been too easy. That would have been letting someone else fight my battles. No, I was going to do this myself. The next year was the most calculated year of my life. I finished college, graduated with honors, and got a job at a small accounting firm. I saved every penny I could, building a war chest for what was coming. I stayed in touch with Detective Martinez, feeding her small assignments, building a case that would leave no room for doubt. And I watched my mother. From a distance, through social media and public records and the occasional drive past her house. I watched her spend money she didn't have on things she didn't need. I watched her post photos of vacations and new cars and expensive dinners, always with a caption about how blessed she was, how grateful, how lucky to have such a wonderful life. She had no idea that I was about to destroy it all. The final piece of the puzzle came on a random Tuesday. I was going through my grandmother's old papers, the ones I had kept in a box under my bed, when I found something I had missed before. A letter, dated 3 weeks before my grandmother died, addressed to her lawyer, Mr. Peterson. "Dear Harold, I am writing to confirm our conversation about Patricia's attempts to access Amelia's trust fund. As we discussed, I do not trust my daughter-in-law. I believe she will stop at nothing to take that money, including forging documents or manipulating Amelia into signing them against her will. Please find attached a sworn affidavit stating that I am of sound mind and body, and that I explicitly forbid Patricia Caldwell from accessing any of Amelia's funds for any reason. If she tries, I want this document used against her in court. I am enclosing a second document as well. A full accounting of everything Patricia has taken from me over the past year. The power of attorney was forged, Harold. I never signed it. I want you to know the truth, even if I'm not brave enough to pursue it myself. I am dying, Harold. I can feel it in my bones. And when I'm gone, I need you to protect my granddaughter. She is the only good thing I ever did, and I will not let Patricia destroy her. With deepest gratitude, Margaret Hart. I read that letter 17 times. I memorized every word. And then I called Mr. Peterson. He was an old man now, nearly 80, with a voice that crackled like old paper. But his mind was sharp and his memory was perfect. He remembered my grandmother. He remembered the forged power of attorney. He remembered everything. Your grandmother wanted me to pursue legal action against Patricia, he told me. But she was too sick to follow through, and by the time she passed away, the trail had gone cold. I've been waiting for someone to pick it back up. I was starting to think no one would. Someone is, I said. Me. The plan went into motion on a Sunday morning in September. I had taken a week off work, flown across the state, and checked into a hotel near my mother's house. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I hadn't told anyone what I was about to do. The first step was the simplest. I sent an anonymous tip to the Social Security Administration, complete with photographs and documentation detailing my mother's disability fraud. I sent another tip to the IRS about Richard's tax evasion. And I sent a third tip to the Insurance Fraud Bureau about the fake flood claims. Those tips would take months to process, months to investigate, months to turn into criminal charges. But that was fine. I wasn't in a hurry. Rome wasn't built in a day, and revenge wasn't either. The second step was more personal. I created a fake email account and started sending anonymous messages to my mother's friends and neighbors. Nothing threatening, nothing illegal, just questions. Innocent questions about her tennis games, her hiking trips, her water skiing vacations. Questions designed to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of people who thought they knew her. The third step was the hardest. I went to see Richard. He was alone that afternoon, working in the garage of the house my father's insurance money had bought. He looked older than I remembered, heavier, grayer. The years had not been kind to him. Or maybe they had been exactly as kind as he deserved. "Amelia," he said, startled when he saw me standing in the driveway, "what are you doing here?" "I came to give you a warning," I said. "Leave my mother. Take whatever you can and leave. Because in about 6 months, she's going to prison, and if you're still with her, you're going with her." His face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the forged power of attorney. The disability fraud, the tax evasion, the insurance claims. I have evidence of all of it, Richard, enough to put you both away for years. You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone and showed him the file. Page after page of bank records, photographs, sworn affidavits. His face went from pale to gray to something almost green. "She's going to prison," I said again. "And you can either go with her, or you can save yourself. But you have to leave now, today, before the investigation starts. Because once the feds get involved, they're going to look at everything, and you and I both know you're not smart enough to hide anything from them." Richard stared at me for a long moment. Then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed. "You think I care about prison?" he said. "You think I care about any of this? I've been trying to leave your mother for years. She's insane, Amelia, completely insane. She's the one who forged the power of attorney. She's the one who filed the disability claims. She's the one who pushed me into every single crime we ever committed. I'm just the idiot who went along with it because I was too scared to say no." "Then leave," I said. "Leave and never come back." He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something almost human in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or guilt, or just exhaustion. "I'll leave tonight," he said. "But you should know something before I go. Your mother didn't just steal from you. She stole from your father too, while he was still alive." I froze. "What do you mean?" "David had a life insurance policy, a big one, $1 million. But he also had a savings account, a separate one that your mother didn't know about. $20,000 that he was saving for your college education. Your mother found out about it after he died, and she took it, every penny, used it to buy the down payment on this house." I couldn't breathe. My father had saved money for me, money that was supposed to be mine, money that my mother had stolen before I even knew it existed. She's been stealing from you your whole life, Amelia, Richard said, grabbing a duffel bag from the garage shelf. The trust fund was just the biggest thing, but she's been taking from you since the day your father died. Clothes, gifts from relatives, birthday money, everything. She took it all and told herself she deserved it because she was raising you alone. Raising me? My voice cracked. She didn't raise me. She ignored me. She abandoned me. She left me with Mrs. Patterson while she went on vacations with you. Richard shrugged. I know, I was there, remember? I saw the whole thing, and I didn't do anything to stop it. So yeah, I'm guilty too, but I'm not as guilty as her, and I'm not going to prison for her crimes. He zipped the duffel bag and walked past me toward his car. At the door, he paused. Your mother never loved anyone but herself, he said. Not you, not David, not even me. She's empty inside, Amelia, a hollow shell that looks like a person, and she'll destroy anyone who gets in the way of what she wants. He drove away without looking back. I stood in the driveway for a long time, watching the dust settle on the road. Then I walked into the house. My mother was in the kitchen, drinking wine and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment she seemed almost happy to see me. Amelia, what a surprise. Richard didn't mention you were coming. He left, I said. He's gone. I told him about the evidence, about the investigation, about everything. And he ran. My mother's face went through a series of expressions too fast to track. Confusion, anger, fear, and finally, a cold, hard calm. What evidence? She asked. I pulled out my phone and showed her the file. The same file I had shown Richard. The forged power of attorney, the disability fraud, the insurance claims, the tax evasion. Page after page of evidence, meticulously organized and documented. You can't prove any of this, she said, but her voice shook. I already have. The Social Security Administration has your file, the IRS has Richard's, the Insurance Fraud Bureau has the flood claims, and the FBI has the forged power of attorney. They're all investigating, Mom, right now, as we speak. She stood up, knocking over her wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. You're lying. I'm not, and even if I was, Richard isn't. He confessed everything. He told me about the savings account, the one from my father. The $20,000 you stole before I was old enough to know it existed. Something broke in my mother's face. The mask slipped, the facade crumbled, and for one terrible moment, I saw the real Patricia Caldwell. Not the mother, not the wife, not the fraud, just a woman. A broken, desperate, pathetic woman who had destroyed everything she ever touched. I needed that money, she whispered. After David died, I was alone. I had a child to raise and no job and no skills. I was terrified, Amelia. You don't understand what that's like. Because you never let me understand. You never let me in. You pushed me away and told yourself I was fine because I was quiet and I didn't complain. But I wasn't fine. I was drowning, and you were standing on the shore watching me go under. I did the best I could. No, you did the best for yourself, and that's the difference between us. I'm going to do the best for everyone else, starting right now. I pulled a document from my bag, a civil lawsuit naming my mother as the defendant. I had drafted it with Mr. Peterson's help, using the evidence Detective Martinez had gathered. It asked for full repayment of the stolen funds, plus punitive damages, plus legal fees. $78,000 in total. I'm suing you, I said, sliding the document across the table. Not for revenge, not for justice, for closure. I'm done letting you control my life. I'm done being your victim. I'm done pretending that we can ever be a family again. My mother read the document with shaking hands. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. You're destroying me, she said. You destroyed yourself. I'm just holding up a mirror so you can see what you've become. I left her standing in the kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and spilled wine and the wreckage of the life she had built on lies. I walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove away without looking back. 6 months later, the criminal investigation concluded. My mother was arrested at her home, in front of her neighbors, in her bathrobe. She was charged with 14 counts of fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. Richard, true to his word, had disappeared. The authorities never found him. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 days, telling the jury everything. The years of neglect, the threats, the slap, the stolen trust fund. I showed them the letter from my grandmother, the bank records, the photographs. I told them about my father's savings account, the $20,000 I would never see again. My mother sat at the defense table, dressed in a suit that was 2 sizes too big, her hair gray and unwashed. She looked old. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had finally run out of lies to tell. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. My mother was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. I watched them lead her away in handcuffs, her eyes searching the gallery for someone to blame. When they landed on me, I didn't look away. I met her gaze and held it until the bailiff pulled her through the door. And then I went home. The trust fund is still sitting in my bank account. I haven't touched it. I don't know if I ever will. $50,000 from a woman who loved me enough to protect me even after she was gone. It feels wrong to spend it. It feels like spending her love, like putting a price on something that should be priceless. But I'm learning that love isn't like money. It doesn't disappear when you use it. It grows, it spreads, it multiplies. I have a new life now, a good life. A life built on honesty and hard work and the knowledge that I am not my mother. I am not broken. I am not empty. I am not a hollow shell pretending to be a person. I am Amelia Hart. My grandmother gave me her heart. My father gave me his eyes, and my mother gave me a gift she never intended, the strength to survive her. The cabin on the 50 acres is mine now. I go there on weekends when the city gets too loud and my thoughts get too heavy. I sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the creek, and I think about my grandmother, about her hands that smelled like lavender, about her voice that sounded like safety, about the letter she wrote, the words she left behind. Don't let anyone take it from you, not ever. They didn't, Grandma. I didn't let them. I won. The trust is still there, waiting. But it's not the only thing she left me. She left me a legacy of courage, a blueprint for survival, and a love that never died. And that, I have finally learned, is worth more than all the money in the world.